All doing on this Wednesday, the 5th. Man, it's getting closer and closer now to another week gone. So, reading Paul Newman Howell, this is an insert on the one last page I read last night. 27th, by the end of 1848, the well traveled Juan was back in Texas, where he became a rancher outside the town named for his family. He was elected 2 terms as Justice of the Peace of Bexar County and became founding father of the Democratic Party in the county. In 1858, he published a memoir of his life adventures. In 1883, he returned to Mexico. He died there on August 1890, 2 months before his 84th birthday. Even while dead, Juan continued to switch countries. On July 4th, 1978, his remains were reintegrated in his namesake town in Texas. So he liked both countries and stuff. So here we go. In 1808, at the age of 10, Caldwell moved from Kentucky to Missouri with his family. He found various ways to make a living and then sought a different edge of frontier, arriving in Texas in February 1831 with his wife and children in a wagon. The family settled in Gonzales, and in time he was put in charge of a Minutemen there in the surrounding areas. After recruiting before the Battle of Gonzales in October 1835, he rode from Gonzales to Mena, informing the colonists of the desired need for their support in volunteer army. Because of this, some call him the Paul Revere of Texas. His next mission would be more political. On February 1st, 1836, Caldwell was elected to delegate to the Texas Independence Convention at Washington and Brazos, and he was a signature of the Texas Declaration of Independence. The convention appointed the community of 3, of which Caldwell was a member, to assess the situation of the enemy and frontier and conditions of the Texas Army. What he saw going forward, Caldwell to recruit volunteers to become Gonzales Ranging Company of mounted volunteer, most of them who died at the Alamo. In September 1842, Caldwell was at 44 older than the most of the men gathered near the occupied San Antonio, and he was certainly one of the more experienced after seizing up the situation. Caldwell issued his own Travis-like massive to appeal to volunteers, hurry on, and lose no time. We fear nothing but God, and through him we fight our battles. Hurrah, hurrah for Texas. He and the 25-year-old Jack Hayes knew that to stop those destructive Santa Anna, his surrogates, General Wall would have to be given a good whipping. The time to do that was before the Mexican army went anywhere else for further pounding. What was needed was to find the best place for the battle. The victory purchased with blood. By the early morning on September 17th, Caldwell and Hayes, now with the total 210 volunteers, were encamping on the east bank of Saldo Creek, 6 miles northeast of San Antonio. Among the volunteers were the men who would become well-known rangers: William Bigfoot Wallace, Sam Walker. The Texan waits for the 1,500 Mexican troops to come and get them. Nature's earthen embankment on the east side of the creek and good stretch of the timber provide of volunteers with excellent cover. There was a clear field of fire into a wide grassy prairie that rose gently from the creek to low ridge. Nearly 800 yards away, an army foolish enough to approach the creek cross the prairie would be far game for accuracy of the Texans' long rifles. To the rear of the position, a steep, heavy, thick ridge roses, nearly vertical from the far bank and the creek, rendering approach from the west practically impossible. Now, the challenge for Caldwell and Hayes was to prevent their eager volunteers from giving up such ground in favor of taking a fight to the Mexicans. They could never hope to drive General Wall and his armies out of the location where he had set up their headquarters. As further insult the Alamo, the only answer was to somehow lure the experienced French commander into attacking the strong defense position along Salado Creek. The plan Caldwell conducted and put into action was to send Jack Hayes and the 36 Rangers to Alamo. Upon the arrival, Hayes and several other of them rode along the mission walls and shout insult to the guards, challenging the Mexicans to fight. Suddenly, the bugle calls began to blare, and troops of lancers galloped out of the compound and towards the tomb raiders. Surprised by the Mexican and clearly outnumbered, Hayes and his men bolted for the creek, with a backup force led by Ben McCullough, providing some covering fire. The Rangers reached the safety of the Texas line well before the Mexican cavalry gained up on the low bridge to the east. After the brief rest, Hayes led his Rangers in series of skirmish with the Lancers, putting their pistols and shotguns to good use. The Rangers managed to kill 10 Mexican cavalrymen and wound 23 more before returning to the creek. Without suffering a single casualty, one more and another Texans took note how calm and collected Hayes was under fire. By noon, General Wall and close to 600 men, plus 2 pieces of artillery, were on the ridge east of the creek. The guns were brought forward, and soon they were banging away at the Texans' position. The barrage did little damage. Even better, Wall had left most of his artillery at the Alamo. This was the serious mistake because the sustained bombardment from all his guns may well have driven the Texans away from the protection of the creek's bank. Now it remains to be seen if the Texans could withstand another advantage to the Mexican army had many more men, as General Wall sat in a large white tent that shielded him and his staff from the harsh rays of the sun. His drummers began to beat out commands. According to the Mexican infantry, formed up in 4 long lines of battle, with thin line and skirmishers, well to the front of the dragons in the rear to act as reserve. Now, the cavalry served as a screen for each flank. The top commander practically licked their lips in appreciation. But for the next 2 hours, there was no large-scale attack wisely. Wool wait for the Texans to come to him, but Caldwell was content to send out up to 20 skirmishes at a time to confuse and tease the Mexicans without revealing how few men he had under his command. As watches ticked away, it was contested to see who had the most patience. Old Pink continued to bid his time, assuring his men. The veteran Indian fighter's resolve was finally rewarded when Wool ordered his drummers to work again. The Mexican officers drew their swords and signaling their troops to advance across that prairie. This was exactly the scenario Caldwell and Hayes had sought. The Mexican marched forward to the beat of their drums and their bayonets glistening in the late afternoon sun. Now, the Texans, concealed behind the cover of the earthen embankment, rose up, aimed their rifles, and issued one volley after another at the enemy mass ranks. Mexican soldiers fell by the dozens, most of them hit in the head or center punch to the chest. During the battle, Codora led close to 50 men, most of them Cherokee, in the attack on the Texans' flank. Now, Cordova had been a thorn of the Texans' side since the independence, and had fought before on the behalf of Mexico. Now his men drew near enough that for a few minutes the fighting was hand to hand. Soon 11 of the enemy lay dead. Now Cordova had remained almost 100 yards away. His gesture exhorting the attack drew the attention of one of the Texans, who raised his rifle and shot him dead. Thorns removed, observing the carnage from his tent. Wool was horrified as the body piled up on the bloody Soka prairie after only 20 minutes. The Texan toll was 1 man killed and a dozen wounded, according to the history. Robert Alterley. Once again, the Texan citizens soldiers had demonstrated his courage in fighting perilously. He had also shown that, let by a respect commander, he could fight as disciplined team to restrain his impulse to throw himself suicidal on the enemy. The Battle of Saddle Creek testified to the Texans' fighting potential when led by a man who knew how to harness it. It was getting to be sunset when Wool couldn't stomach it anymore. He ordered his battery troops to reassemble and began to retreat to San Antonio. They left 60 bodies on the battlefield and filled their wagons with another 44 dead, and suggesting a total of 150 wounded. The following day, the Mexicans held a mass funeral in San Antonio rather than the Grand Victoria Fandango they had planned earlier. Unfortunately, the Texans, another battle occurred on the same day, September 17th, that took a lot of pleasure out of Saddle Creek action. During the unbeknownst to Caldwell, a company of 54 Texans, mostly from Fayette County and led by Nicholas Mosby Dawson, a veteran of the Texas Revolution, he hurried from LaGrange towards the Creek battle. Suddenly, they found themselves between San Antonio and the retreating Mexican army. While afraid of being surrounded, had a contingency of cavalry, possible as many as 400 men, and 2 cannons attack the newcomers. The Texans were able to hold their own against the almost overwhelming rifle fire, but once the cannons got within range, the facilities mounted quickly. Dawson realized the situation was hopeless and was a white flag surrender. However, both sides continued to fire. Sell your lives as dearly as possible. Dawson called to his men, "Let victory be purchased with blood." A moment later, Dawson was killed, and the Mexican advance overrunning the Texan position. Most of them put down their arms and attempt to surrender, but the enemy troops barricaded many of them. When the engagement was over, in a little more than an hour, 36 of the Texans were dead. The Mexican took the rest as prisoners, though 2 Texans did manage to escape. Later that day, Caldwell troops located the site of what becomes known as the Dawson Massacre and buried the dead Texans. They did not bury the dead Mexicans who had been left behind and leave them to the predators. Well, that's it for that. Next chapter is chapter 15. Take the fight south. So appreciate y'all coming and listening, and we'll talk to you all later. Hey, see you later. Bye.